Welcome to episode number 234, Bad Days. I'm your host, Damon Soka. Before we get too far along today, I wanted to thank those of you who comment on the podcasts and who send me your emails. I assure you that I read everyone carefully and respond when I can. The comment section doesn't always allow for me to provide comments back, but I do absolutely appreciate your willingness to share. I also want to thank those who listen regularly. The podcast statistics only provide the city and country from which the person downloaded the episode, but I see similar cities and countries again and again. So many of you listen and keep me writing and, in some ways, healing. Truly, this has been some of the best therapy I've had over the many years of my illness. Your willingness to listen has actually allowed me to share and hopefully, in turn, help you in some small way. Now, I may not know you fully, but I do understand your pain and suffering. Over the last 7 weeks, I have been suffering the effects of autoimmune disease and COVID. Somewhere between my chronic illness and my arthritis and the virus, I have found a hell that I did not know existed. I admit it has tested almost every fiber of my being. I have literally been sleeping for almost the last 7 weeks due to exhaustion and inflammation. Naturally, this has caused a serious increase in my mental health symptoms, and so between the illness and my mental health, the valley of the shadow of death has become all too real at times. And no, I am not going to die, although at times I have wished for such relief. And no, I'm not suicidal. Just struggling with the weight that comes upon the soul when bad days descend and relief doesn't necessarily appear. When bad days come, and of course we know they will, we can find ourselves struggling with more than the simple questions of life. Surrounded by pain, exhaustion, depression, anxiety, and everything that causes suffering, we reach out to the Father, crying as Joseph Smith did, and the Savior, "O God, where art thou? And let this cup pass from me." These are phrases we know well from the Scriptures. We ask for, bargain, demand, plead, beg, and hope for mercy. Sometimes we receive those comforting words and feelings, and other times it appears that we, like the Savior and Joseph Smith, must drink the bitter cup we have been given. We often talk about the Savior always coming to our rescue and Him binding wounds and healing trauma. What we don't often talk about are the moments when, like the angel in the garden, He can only be with us as we suffer, but He must allow us to suffer. We don't talk about how difficult the endurance can be, how profound the struggle and the questions. Minutes pass like hours and hours like days when we seek that healing balm. Yet we will suffer, and at times the Lord must withhold His hand. He must allow the pain to occur, the long-term illness continue to be long-term. He must allow for as much as we are able to endure. I know this seems counterintuitive to the idea that man is that he might have joy, but true joy seems to have a deep connection with understanding pain and suffering. Charity, the true love of Christ, also appears to have deep connections or community connections with understanding the sorrows and pains of life. Although when we suffer, we do not see it as expanding our joy, but in essence, that is one of its purposes. If the Savior rescued us every time we stubbed our toe or suffered a debilitating illness, He would be more like a pharmacy than a Savior. We would be tied to Him through miracles, and we would be dependent upon those miracles to continue. Our relationship would be nothing more than transactional, and perhaps not much of a relationship. We would quickly wane and look to other sources when our quota of miracles ran out. I often think about the individuals at the pool of Bethsaida, where the crippled man was healed, who had been crippled for far too many years, I admit. I more often think about these individuals who were left at the water after the Savior had healed this man. They witnessed a beautiful miracle, a man leaping for joy, a short commotion, and then everything returned to the way it was. At that moment, there was no miracle for them. I am certain that this moment was extremely disappointing. Up to that point in time, they had never seen a miracle of this nature. Rumor and superstition had caused them to believe in a supposed miracle moving of the water, and yet through their own eyes they witnessed one who had the power to remove their infirmity, and then he was gone. How disappointing that must have been to them. How troubling that they were not healed. So many questions must have tortured their minds. Were they not worthy? Were they not suffering the same as this man who was healed? Did not this man love them as well? I think that we have all been there, asking similar questions when we suffer. Where is my healing? Where is my reward for living the covenants? Where is my Savior and my miracle? I've truly come recently to better understand these individuals who were left behind, who continued to suffer, who struggled to understand the why. Were they not worthy? Were they not suffering? Did he not have the power to heal them? I think that I have probably asked these questions far more than I am willing to admit today. It is difficult to awake after a night of troubling sleep due to continuous pain and exhaustion and realize that today is unlikely to be better than yesterday. It is difficult to understand that the harder we try to live the gospel, sometimes the harder the gospel gets. It is difficult to see through the mist of darkness and wonder when our day will come. And a trial is so much easier when we can see the end to our suffering, when we have a defined point in time, and that light reaches our mind and heart. When we see nothing but darkness, pain, and suffering, time seems to elongate and lengthen. Now, about 8 to 10 weeks ago, the Lord, through several personal revelatory methods, told me that I would need to trust Him. Now, I thought I had a fairly good level of trust in the Lord. He and I have been working through this illness for some time now, and I thought that my trust in Him had progressed quite well. I naturally stated, of course, that I trusted Him, and that I would trust Him no matter what He decided. And so my illness progressed into the state that I now find myself. To say that my trust has been tested is an understatement, and perhaps a statement of how much more I really did need to learn. And yes, the Lord has rearranged my life again. I will have a new job shortly where I can work remotely, and He has provided for a long-term accommodation for my illness. I still believe and have promises of healing, but for now, the Lord has put me through a difficult trust exercise. And I must state that the testing and the fortification of my trust and love for the Lord has most certainly spilled over and inundated my family. That is a natural consequence of our illness and these trust exercises from the Lord. It will always affect others and be a part of their lives. Our learning will be their learning. From what I can tell in the scriptures and my own experience, bad days are a required element of personal spiritual growth. They are a catalyst to true understanding of the Lord and His purposes for us as individuals and as families. It seems we cannot grow unless we are brought to ask the question, "O God, where art Thou?" This appears to be the process of exaltation. Now, it was written that a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief was a requirement for the Savior. It was not just a requirement for the Savior. It seems that under the right circumstances and with the correct preparation, the Lord allows for us to be placed under very difficult illnesses and circumstances so that He can truly tutor us. We often ask, why me, when these circumstances come to us? We also look around and ask, why just me? Why must my problems be so difficult? Why must I suffer so deeply? Why are not others so blessed as I am? Several reasons exist for the why, but I think that the most important to understand that the major portion of why is really sacred to the individual. This type of celestial trial is certainly not punishment, although it may feel like it. The Lord sees you as worthy to suffer. I know that that wording seems strange. We would like it to read worthy to be blessed, and perhaps the two statements are very similar. Worthy to suffer means that we are spiritually prepared for the celestial trials in our lives. The Lord sees that we are ready to take upon us true discipleship and master the qualities of celestial life. Strangely, perhaps not so strangely, many, if not all of these qualities can only be taught under the extreme pressures of difficult trials. I've come to learn that when those pressures come upon us and we cry out for mercy, we then become sufficiently humble ourselves so that our hearts may be changed. Suffering, when allowed under the right conditions, leads us to greater charity and love. Why did the Savior need to be a man of sorrows? The answer is quite simple. It taught him compassion and love. Didn't the Savior already have a perfect love for everyone? Yes, but experiential love and understanding cannot be taught in books, but must be experienced. While the Savior was perfect, He needed experiential understanding of mortality to help us. Now, he could have become a God without the need of mortality, but he chose to experience it so that he could compassionately allow us to suffer through our own celestial trials. While the Savior didn't necessarily need these trials for his sake, we do. I don't believe that celestial life is attainable without these deeply refining experiences in our lives. Until we turn ourselves fully over to the Savior and allow for these trials to pass through us and give us experience and ultimately change our hearts and nature, I do not believe that we will be allowed to enter that hallowed space. We are going to have bad days. We are likely to have many of them. What we do with them will be up to each of us. No amount of suffering under the right spiritual circumstances is ever wasted. One day the Lord will give us perspective of our growth from His eyes, and we will fall down at His feet. Until then, we must rely upon our faith and trust in the Lord. One thing I have noticed throughout my difficulties is that when I accept the Lord's will concerning my suffering, it actually eases my pains and concerns. When we fight against the Lord and His will, things are just more difficult in our lives. This doesn't mean that we won't ask the why questions and ponder what the Lord desires, and this doesn't mean that eventually we won't be healed. What it does mean is that the Lord walks with us and supports us when things get far too difficult for our mortal minds. When we truly accept the Lord's will, we will find ourselves in a strange place where we can suffer with joy. I admit to finding a piece of this joy during my recent difficulties. While I have struggled deeply and have endured serious pain, I have felt the joy of a loving Savior beside me, as well as some of those who have passed on. He has encouraged me, and they have encouraged me, pushed me, and allowed me to be at peace with the outcome of the trials. Somehow, in some strange way, I have experienced a joy that I didn't really think was possible. I have found joy in the trial, and perhaps this is one of the many things we are to learn about joy, that it is truly possible under any circumstance if we allow ourselves to accept and to learn the will of the Lord. I truly hope that your bad days turn into celestial life, and that you find that strange joy in the midst of your deep suffering. Until next week, do your part so that the Lord can do His.